Psalms 1, NLT version, New Living Translation. Book 1, Psalms 1 through 41. Oh, the joys of those who do not follow the advice of the wicked, or stand around with sinners, or join in with mockers, but they delight in the law of the Lord, meditating on it day and night. They are like trees planted along the river bank, bearing fruit each season. Their leaves never wither, and they prosper in all they do. But not the wicked. They are like worthless chaff, scattered by the wind. They will be condemned at the time of judgment. Sinners will have no place among the godly, for the Lord watches over the path of the godly, but the path of the wicked leads to destruction. Now I'm going to read the King James Version, Psalms 1. Blessings on the godly. Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. The ungodly are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind driveth away. Therefore the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knoweth the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish. Here's some notes in the King James Version. For verse 1:1, Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. Success. Psalm 1 sets the tone for the whole book of Psalms. It contrasts the ways of life of the blessed man and the wicked man. Being blessed or successful is not a once-for-all time dramatic event, but rather a lifetime of choosing to follow God and His commandments. Success happens when we move from grudging acceptance to enthusiastic delight in absorbing and then following God's laws and mandates. Nothing provides more resources. No motivational speakers will set us on a better course. No degrees will give us more of a life-changing education. At first glance, this kind of lifestyle may not look like the most exciting way to live. We can go through life plodding along this way without anybody even noticing. It's a lifestyle that doesn't fill up trophy cases or result in monuments being created. It can, however, end with, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant," from our Lord. The excitement is in the results of being in a position to help family and friends grow. Success comes from being in a relationship with God that means fruitfulness by His definition. Verse 1:1. Blessed is the man. Hebrew wisdom literature and poetry is filled with descriptions of two favorite characters, the righteous man and wisdom, often personified as she. In this context, the righteous man is a literary tool used to represent those who love and desire to please God rather than an actual individual. Verse 1:2. Meditate. Biblical meditation is focusing the mind on Scripture or the attributes and actions of God. 1:3. Shall prosper. This is not a guarantee of the future financial worth of the righteous. Rather, the righteous person is always useful and productive to the Lord. 1:6. Knoweth the way. The verb knoweth in this context refers not just to God's awareness, but to an intimate personal knowledge. 101:4. God is intimately involved with the way of the righteous, but has no connection with the way of the ungodly except in judgment. 146:9. So that's the King James Version along with the notes. Now I'm going to read the NET version, New English Translation. How blessed is the one who does not follow the advice of the wicked, or stand in the pathway with sinners, or sit in the assemblies of scoffers. Instead, he finds pleasure in obeying the Lord's commands. He meditates on His commands day and night. He is like a tree planted by flowing streams. It yields its fruit at the proper time, and its leaves never fall off. He succeeds in everything he attempts. Not so with the wicked. Instead, they are like wind-driven chaff. For this reason the wicked cannot withstand judgment, nor can sinners join the assembly of the godly. Certainly, the Lord guards the way of the godly, but the way of the wicked ends in destruction. Now we're going to read the NET notes, which are fairly long. A. Psalm 1. In this wisdom psalm, the author advises his audience to reject the lifestyle of the wicked and to be loyal to God. The psalmist contrasts the destiny of the wicked with that of the righteous, emphasizing that the wicked are eventually destroyed while the godly prosper under the Lord's protective care. B. The Hebrew noun is an abstract plural. The word often refers metonymically to the happiness that God-given security and prosperity produce. C. Hebrew. Oh, the happiness of the man! Hebrew wisdom literature often assumes and reflects the male-oriented perspective of ancient Israelite society. A principle of the psalm is certainly applicable to all people regardless of their gender or age. To facilitate modern application, we translate the gender of age-specific man with the more neutral one. Generic he is employed in verses 2 to 3. Since the godly man described in the psalm is representative of followers of God, note the plural form tzaddikim, righteous, godly. One could translate the collective singular with the plural those, both here and in verses 2 to 3, where singular pronouns and verbal forms are utilized in the Hebrew text. However, here the singular form may emphasize that godly individuals are usually outnumbered by the wicked. Retaining the singular allows the translation to retain this emphasis. D. Hebrew, walk in. The three perfect verbal forms in verse 1 refer in this context to characteristic behavior. The sequence walk, stand, sit envisions a progression from relatively casual association with the wicked to complete identification with them. E. The Hebrew noun translated advice most often refers to the counsel or advice one receives from others. To walk in the advice of the wicked means to allow their evil advice to impact and determine one's behavior. In the Psalms, the Hebrew term rashaim, wicked, describes people who are proud, practical atheists, Psalm 10:2, 4, and 11, who hate God's commands, commit sinful deeds, speak lies and slander, Psalm 50:16 through 20, and cheat others, Psalm 37:21. G. Pathway. Here refers to the lifestyle of sinners. To stand in the pathway with sinners means to closely associate with them in their sinful behavior. H. Here the Hebrew term moshev, although often translated seat, appears to refer to the whole assembly of evildoers. The word also carries the semantic nuance assembly in Psalm 107:32, where it is in synonymous parallelism with kahal, assembly. I. The Hebrew word refers to arrogant individuals, Proverbs 21:24, who love conflict, Proverbs 22:10, and vociferously reject wisdom and correction, Proverbs 1:22, 9, 7 through 8, 13, 1, 15, 12. To sit in the assembly of such people means to completely identify with them in their proud, sinful plans and behavior. J. Here the Hebrew expression ki'im instead introduces a contrast between the sinful behavior depicted in verse 1 and the godly lifestyle described in verse 2. Hebrew, K. His delight is in the law of the Lord. In light of the following line, which focuses on studying the Lord's law, one might translate, he finds pleasure in studying the Lord's commands. However, even if one translates the line this way, it is important to recognize that mere study and intellectual awareness are not ultimately what bring divine favor. Study of the law is metonymic here for the correct attitudes and behavior that should result from an awareness and commitment to God's moral will. Thus, obeying has been used in the translation rather than studying. L. The Hebrew imperfect verbal form draws attention to the characteristic behavior described here and lends support to the hyperbolic adverbial phrase day and night. The verb hagag means to recite quietly, to meditate, and refers metonymically to intense study and reflection. M, or his law. N. The Hebrew perfect verbal form with vav, consecutive here, carries the same characteristic force as the imperfect in the preceding verse. According to the psalmist, the one who studies and obeys God's commands typically prospers. O. Hebrew, channels of water. P. Hebrew, which. Q. The Hebrew imperfect verbal forms in verse 3 draw attention to the typical nature of the action states they describe. R. Hebrew, in its season. S. Or, fade, wither. The author compares the godly individual to a tree that has a rich water supply planted by flowing streams, develops a strong root system, and is filled with leaves and fruit. His simile suggests that the godly have a continual source of life, which in turn produces stability and uninterrupted prosperity. T. Hebrew. And all which he does prospers, and all which he does he causes to prosper. The simile of the tree does not extend to this line. It is not certain if the Hifil verbal form, yatzliach, is intransitive, exhibitive, prospers, or causative, causes to prosper here. If the verb is intransitive, then kol, all, everything, is the subject. If the verb is causative, then the godly individual or the Lord himself is the subject and is the object. The wording is reminiscent of Joshua 1:8, where the Lord tells Joshua, "This law scroll must not leave your lips. You must memorize it day and night so you can carefully obey all that is written in it. Then you will prosper." Literally, cause your way to prosper and be successful. I need to reread this section here. If the verb is intransitive, then kol, all, everything, is the subject. If the verb is causative, then the godly individual or the Lord himself is the subject and kol is the object. I needed to read that section because part of it was in Hebrew and I didn't remember it was kol. U. Here the Hebrew expression, kiim, instead introduces a contrast between the prosperity of the godly depicted in verse 3 and the destiny of the wicked described in verse 4. V. Hebrew. They are like the chaff which the wind blows about. The Hebrew imperfect verbal form draws attention to the typical nature of the action described. Wind-driven chaff. In contrast to the well-rooted and productive tree described in verse 3, the wicked are like a dried-up plant that has no root system and is blown away by the wind. The simile describes the destiny of the wicked. A. Or therefore. I'm on page 900 now of NET. Starting with the verse 5, for this reason the wicked cannot withstand judgment. A. Or therefore. B. Hebrew, arise, in. But the verb is used metonymically here in the sense of stand, endure, as in 1 Samuel 13:14 and Job 8:15. The negated Hebrew imperfect verbal form is here taken as indicating incapability or lack of potential, though one could understand the verb form as indicating what is typical, do not withstand, or what will happen, will not withstand. C. Hebrew, the judgment. The article indicates a judgment that is definite in the mind of the speaker. In the immediate context, this probably does not refer to the final judgment described in later biblical revelation, but to a temporal, historical judgment which the author anticipates. Periodically during the Old Testament period, God would come in judgment, removing the wicked from the scene while preserving a godly remnant. See Genesis 6-9, Psalm 37, and Habakkuk 3. Now we're on verse 6. Certainly the Lord guards the way of the godly, but the way of the wicked ends in destruction. E. The translation understands ki as asseverative. Another option is to translate for, understanding verse 6 as a theological explanation for verses 3 through 5, which contrasts the respective destinies of the godly and the wicked. F. Hebrew. The Lord knows the way of the righteous. To know a way means, in its most basic sense, to recognize, acknowledge a pathway, route, or prescribed way of life. Here it could refer to the Lord recognizing the behavior of the godly and, by metonymy, rewarding their godliness with security and prosperity, resulting in the translation, the Lord rewards the behavior of the godly. The present translation takes the verb in the sense of mark out, Job 23:10, which metonymically could mean watch over, protect, guard. In this case, the way of the ungodly is not their behavior, but their course of life or destiny. A translation reflecting this would be, the Lord protects the lives of the godly, or the Lord watches over the destiny of the godly, from NEB, NIV, and NRSV versions. The Hebrew active participle, yodea, knows, has here a characteristic durative force. G. Hebrew, but the way of the wicked perishes. The way of the wicked may refer to their course in life. Psalm 146:9, Proverbs 4:19, Jeremiah 12:1, or their sinful behavior. Proverbs 12:26 and 15:9. The Hebrew imperfect verbal form probably describes here what typically happens, though one could take the form as indicating what will happen, will perish. And lastly, I'm going to go through NIV version. So here we are with the NIV. Blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or sit in the seat of mockers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever he does prospers. Not so the wicked. They are like chaff that the wind blows away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. Psalm 1. Author and date unknown. Godly wisdom here declares the final outcome of the two ways, the way of sinners and the way of the righteous. As an introduction to the book, this psalm reminds the reader that those of whom the psalms speak, using various terms as the people of God, those whom he receives in his presence and favors with his salvation and blessing, must be characterized by righteousness. Sinners have no place among them. And 2, that the godly piety that speaks in the Psalms is a faithful response to God's revealed and written directives for life, which is the path that leads to blessedness. Verse 1:1. Blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or sit in the seat of mockers. It speaks progressively of association with the ungodly and participation in their ungodly ways. Blessed, the happy condition of those who revere the Lord and do his will, who put their trust in him, and so are blessed by God. The Psalter begins by proclaiming the blessedness of the godly, and ends by calling all living things to praise God in his earthly and heavenly sanctuaries. Psalm 150. Walk in. Order his life according to counsel, deliberations, and advice. Stand. Station oneself. Sinners. Those for whom evil is habitual, for whom wickedness is a way of life. Settle oneself. Mockers. Those who ridicule God and defiantly reject his law. Verse 2. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. On his law he meditates, seeking guidance for life in God's law rather than in the deliberations of the wicked, day and night. See Joshua 1:8. Verse 3. He is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever he does prospers. Like a tree, does not wither. See Jeremiah 17:8. A simile of the blessedness of the righteous. Such a tree withstands the buffeting of the winds in flourishing. It blesses man, animals, and birds with its unfailing fruit and shade. Verse 4. Not so the wicked. They are like chaff that wind blows away. Like chaff blows away. A simile of the wretchedness of the wicked. Chaff is carried away by the lightest wind, thus cleansing by extracting what is useless. Verse 5. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. Will not be able to withstand God's wrath when he judges. Assembly. The worshiping assembly at God's sanctuary. Righteous. One of several terms in the Old Testament for God's people. It presents them as those who honor God and order their lives in all things according to his will. In every human relationship, they faithfully fulfill the obligations that the relationship entails, remembering the power and authority of whatever sort, domestic, social, political, economic, religious, intellectual, are to be used to bless, not to exploit. Verse 6. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. Implicit in the destinies of the two lifestyles and the inner life they express are also the destinies of those who choose them. So that's a review of the NLT version, the King James version, the NET version with all its translation notes, and the NIV version and its notes.